The fragile relationship between the United States and Cuba has always been a delicate balancing act, shaped by decades of mistrust, shifting policies, and the ever-present shadow of Cold War history. Even in moments of apparent calm, the underlying tensions have never truly disappeared. Now, that relationship is once again on the edge, teetering between a new era of confrontation and the slim hope of dialogue. On January 11, 2026, President Donald Trump issued a public ultimatum that sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles. Cuba must strike a deal with his administration, or face an immediate and total halt to all Venezuelan oil shipments. The message was clear, direct, and unmistakably forceful. This threat, coming on the heels of a dramatic U.S. military operation in Venezuela, would sever Cuba's main energy lifeline. For an island nation already struggling with shortages and blackouts, the consequences would be devastating, plunging Cuba into an even deeper crisis, with ripple effects felt in every corner of society. For Cuba, which has relied on Venezuelan oil for decades to power its cities, fuel its transportation, and keep its economy afloat, the ultimatum is more than just a political maneuver. It is a direct challenge to the country's sovereignty, its independence, and its very ability to survive in the face of mounting external pressure. Trump's demand leaves Cuba with two stark options, each fraught with risk and uncertainty. The first, negotiate under intense pressure, potentially making painful concessions that could reshape the nation's future and its relationship with the United States. The second, refuse to yield and risk economic catastrophe, widespread shortages, social unrest, and the possibility of a humanitarian crisis that could push the Cuban people to the brink. The timing of this ultimatum, coming immediately after the U.S. intervention in Venezuela, was no accident. It's a calculated move designed to maximize pressure on Havana, exploiting a moment of regional instability to force a decision. Around the world, governments, journalists, and ordinary citizens are watching closely as Cuba faces a monumental choice. The fate of its people, its government, and its future now hang in the balance, with every move scrutinized on the global stage. The stage is set for a high-stakes confrontation, one that could redefine not only U.S.-Cuba relations, but also the daily lives of millions on the island. As the world holds its breath, Cuba stands at a crossroads, its next steps destined to shape history. The dramatic turning point came when U.S. forces captured Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro, sending shockwaves through Latin America and toppling Cuba's closest and most powerful ally. For years, Maduro had been a symbol of resistance against U.S. influence in the region, but his sudden removal left a power vacuum and set off a chain reaction that would reshape the political landscape. The world watched as images of Maduro in custody flashed across global news networks, while protests erupted in the streets of Caracas and beyond. The U.S. government wasted no time in announcing the capture, signaling a new era of American intervention in Venezuela. With Maduro out of the picture, the United States swiftly moved to seize control of Venezuela's vast oil reserves. American companies and officials took over key oil facilities, redirecting up to 50 million barrels of crude to U.S. interests almost overnight. This bold move not only secured a critical energy supply for the U.S., but also sent a clear message to the world about America's willingness to use its power to protect its interests. The oil that once fueled the economies of Venezuela and its allies was now flowing north, fundamentally altering the balance of power in the region. This decisive action abruptly ended the decades-old arrangement that had bound Cuba and Venezuela together. For years, Cuba had sent thousands of doctors, teachers, and advisors to Venezuela, providing vital services in exchange for heavily subsidized oil. The partnership had been a lifeline for both nations, allowing Cuba to keep its lights on and its economy afloat. But with the U.S. takeover, that exchange was shattered, leaving both countries scrambling to adapt to a new reality. The loss of Venezuelan oil left Cuba suddenly isolated and deeply vulnerable. Almost overnight, the island's energy supply was cut off, plunging cities into darkness and forcing ordinary Cubans to wait in long lines for scarce fuel. Blackouts became a daily occurrence, and the sense of uncertainty grew as the government struggled to find alternative sources of energy. The economic shock was immediate and severe, touching every aspect of Cuban life. Now the Trump administration wielded Venezuelan oil as a powerful weapon, using its control over the region's most valuable resource to force Havana to the negotiating table. The message from Washington was unmistakable: cooperate, or face even deeper isolation and hardship. The U.S. leveraged its new position to demand political concessions, hoping to reshape Cuba's future to better align with American interests. The era of Cuban-Venezuelan solidarity was over. For the first time in decades, Cuba found itself facing the United States alone, cut off from its most important ally and forced to confront a profound economic crisis. The government's options were limited, and the people braced for even harder times ahead. The message from the US was clear. Without a deal, Cuba's energy lifeline would remain severed. The consequences of inaction were stark: more blackouts, more shortages, and a future clouded by uncertainty. Now, the future of the island hangs in the balance. Everything depends on how Cuba chooses to respond to this new and daunting reality, whether it can adapt, negotiate, or find a new path forward in a world that has suddenly changed overnight. President Trump made his stance unmistakably clear on Truth Social, using the platform to broadcast a message that reverberated across the globe. His words were not just a policy statement, they were a warning, a line drawn in the sand for both allies and adversaries to see. There will be no more oil or money going to Cuba. Zero. The message was blunt, signaling a dramatic escalation in US policy. Oil tankers that once sailed freely now faced an uncertain future, and Cuba's already fragile energy sector braced for impact. Trump accused Cuba of propping up Venezuelan dictators in exchange for oil, declaring that era finished. For decades, Havana and Caracas had maintained a mutually beneficial relationship. Oil for political support. Now, the US was determined to break that cycle, aiming to isolate both regimes and force a new reality in the region. Speaking to reporters, Trump offered a path to negotiation, but only on US terms. He made it clear that the door to dialogue was open, but only if Cuba was willing to make significant changes. The administration's message was simple: comply, or face even harsher consequences. The deal on the table would likely require major political concessions from Havana, especially regarding the treatment of Cuban exiles and sweeping domestic reforms. For many in the Cuban-American community, this was a long-awaited opportunity to push for change on the island, but for the Cuban government, it represented a direct challenge to its sovereignty and political model. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, a longtime Cuba hawk and influential voice in shaping U.S. policy, is driving this aggressive approach. Rubio's deep ties to the Cuban exile community and his hardline stance have made him a central figure in the administration's strategy, ensuring that pressure on Havana remains relentless. The oil cutoff is more than just an economic sanction, it's a powerful tool of leverage for deeper U.S. goals. The aim is not only to change Cuba's alliances, but to force a transformation of its political system, pushing the island toward democracy and away from authoritarian rule. Now Cuba faces a stark and daunting choice: defy the United States and risk economic collapse, or come to the negotiating table and risk surrendering elements of its sovereignty. The Cuban people, already struggling with shortages and uncertainty, watch anxiously as their leaders weigh the options. The pressure is immense, and the stakes could not be higher. The outcome of this standoff will shape not only the future of Cuba, but the balance of power in the entire region. Cuba's response was swift and defiant. President Miguel Díaz-Canel declared on social media, "No one dictates what we do," vowing to defend the homeland at any cost. He framed the standoff as a clash of values: revolutionary sacrifice versus American transactionalism. Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez dismissed U.S. claims as baseless and asserted Cuba's right to trade freely. The government's message: Cuba will not negotiate under duress or abandon its principles, even in the face of severe hardship. This stance draws on decades of resisting U.S. pressure since the 1959 revolution. The leadership is preparing the public for sacrifice, casting it as a matter of national dignity. Defiance, not capitulation, is the official line as the crisis deepens. The U.S. operation in Venezuela had a tragic cost for Cuba. 32 Cuban citizens were killed during the fighting. Many were security advisors stationed in Venezuela, now mourned as martyrs by the Cuban state. Their deaths deepen the sense of crisis and fuel anti-U.S. sentiment in Cuba. The government uses this loss to rally unity and justify resistance, framing the conflict as one of national honor. Negotiating with the U.S. after such losses is politically fraught, seen as a potential betrayal of the fallen. The conflict is now about more than oil, it's about justice and national pride. For ordinary Cubans, the political standoff means immediate fears about daily survival. The threat of losing Venezuelan oil could plunge the island into blackouts, food shortages, and paralyzed transportation. Power outages are already common. Without oil, they'll worsen, affecting everything from food storage to basic comfort. Gasoline is scarce, and a total cutoff would cripple the country's ability to move people and goods. Many fear a return to the special period of the 1990s, marked by extreme austerity after the Soviet collapse. The government's rhetoric may stir pride, but on the ground, people worry about their next meal and keeping the lights on. The looming crisis is forcing Cubans to brace for even harder times. Among Cubans, reactions to the crisis are a mix of anxiety and resilience. Many, like Paula Perez in Havana, fear worsening scarcity and uncertainty about the future. Younger generations, already struggling, dread conditions deteriorating further. Yet older Cubans like Luis Alberto Jimenez express defiance, saying they're prepared for anything after decades of hardship. This resilience, born of years under embargo, remains a powerful force. People rely on informal networks and ingenuity to survive. Inventando y resolviendo with what little they have. While no one welcomes more hardship, many see it as another test of their endurance and identity. The crisis is met with both worry and a stubborn will to endure. This confrontation is just the latest in a long, bitter history between the US and Cuba. Since the 1959 revolution, the US has sought to isolate and pressure Cuba, from the Bay of Pigs to the embargo. These decades of hostility have shaped Cuban identity, making defiance of the US a matter of national pride. The brief thaw under Obama now seems like an anomaly, as Trump's hardline stance revives old tensions. For Havana, capitulating to US demands would betray the revolution's legacy. The historical weight of this conflict makes compromise politically dangerous for Cuba's leaders. The past looms large over every decision in this crisis. Cuba now faces two grim options. It can defy Trump, endure deeper austerity, and hope for new allies, risking unrest and instability. Or it can negotiate, likely at the cost of major political concessions and a blow to revolutionary ideals. Either path carries huge risks, economic collapse or internal division. President Diaz-Canel must navigate between resistance and the dangers of compromise. In the short term, hardship will intensify as Cuba resists US pressure and quietly explores possible deals. The world watches as the fate of Cuba and its revolution hangs in the balance. The coming months will test the government's control, the people's endurance, and the future of US-Cuba relations.